I'm the founder of the Healing Center, and this is a recap and a review of the teaching topic of the second workshop in a series of 6 workshops that we're putting on that we call the Ultimate How-To Guide for Meditation. Okay, so this one here, well, first of all, a quick recap of the first one, and if for some reason you missed the first video, or maybe you're watching this video from one of the variety of different websites that it migrates to, if you go to video.healingcenter.ca, and that's center spelled CENTER.ca, that's our YouTube channel. And if you take a look at the videos, you will see the first one, and I think it's even titled, Meditation Workshop Review Video. So if you just kind of scroll through the list of uploads that we have, you'll find the first one. So a real quick recap of the topic for the first video was the exercise that came from that was learning how to identify some of the internal components of what so often we look at as primarily an external experience. So as I said, and you can look at the video for more details, but essentially there's 3 components that we talked about. There's the physical, which is the external, so our 5 senses world, and then there's the other 2 are our internal environment, is what we call it, and it's our thoughts and our emotions. So what we talked about was sort of 3 basic building blocks that we use to build our experience, and the homework assignment was just sort of learning to identify those. Okay, so in the second one, we started to delve into a little bit more about that, specifically in the area of our thoughts. And I've actually got we call it the experience triangle. So I have it in the flip chart. I'm just going to bring it here, and I'm going to show it. And I don't know how good it's going to pick up on the camera, but we'll do what we can here. And so you can see it's a triangle. The top part, or the biggest part, is the physical. Then underneath that we have the thoughts and the emotions, or the emotions and the thoughts. And then at the very bottom we have, and you might be able to see sort of a little drawing, I have an eyeball, or the eye. And so just kind of remember that, refresh that in your mind. And as I said, the triangle, the bigger part of the triangle is the physical. For us, that signifies the most obvious, not the most powerful or most relevant, but the most obvious. Okay, so this is what we call our experience triangle. As I said, the 3 components, and the I component, which we talked a little bit about, but we'll get into that more later. Okay, so during the second workshop, we talked a lot about the thought component. All right, so I'm just going to put this away. So we talked a lot about how, as I said, our internal environment, and really it's our internal environment that defines for us whether we're having a pleasant or an unpleasant, and you can put a whole variety of feeling words under that, but essentially a pleasant or an unpleasant experience. And our experience of life is not just this physical piece of it. Our emotions and our thoughts are just as much, and actually really are what give us the flavor of the experience, more so than the physical. But what happens, because the physical tends to be the most obvious, because that's the wide part of the triangle, we tend to look at that as being the most relevant. And while it's obviously a piece, it is not the entire puzzle, it's not the entire triangle. And as we continue on through the workshop, you will find that it's actually the lesser of the 3 when it comes down to, as I said, flavoring our experience, whether it's a pleasant one or an unpleasant one. So we talked about, as I mentioned, we talked about the thoughts. And thoughts, think about thoughts, there you go, think about thoughts as that internal dialogue that we have in our mind. And actually, if you think about it, we have many dialogues. It's like we got this whole conundrum of people all talking at the same time and saying different things, and it's like, oh my goodness. And it's interesting, often when people come to our meditation gatherings, one of their desires is to be able to still their mind. And a huge step towards stilling your mind is being able to identify, well, so first of all, to identify that thoughts are as much of a manageable component as our external environment is, and then to begin to be able to kind of divide that whole mess of voices into some categories that we can begin to mentor and work with, just like they were another person, if you will. We really can manage our thoughts, and that's one of the reasons why the first homework assignment was learning how to specifically be consciously aware of what are the thoughts that I'm having. So let's now talk about thoughts as these voices in our mind. And what we talked about was there essentially are 4 different types of voices. And so we'll talk about how to identify those, and then we'll talk about the action plan once we've identified those. Okay, so the first voice, the label that we give this voice is we call this the voice of the accuser. And the best way to identify this voice is simply it accuses. And it's going to say things like, what were you thinking, right? Or why do you, what were you thinking that it could be different this time? Or things like you're broke, you're fat, you're ugly, you're not good enough, all those, think accusing voices, and they'll usually come on hard and fast, and they'll be right in your face, and they'll be very confrontational. And sometimes what they will do is they will use evidence from a past memory to support their claims. Okay, so the easiest way to remember the voice of the accuser is accusing, abrasive, in your face, like that. So, once you learn to identify that voice, the action plan to mentor, to release, to, to squash down, to neutralize that voice, the first step in your action plan is to do nothing. Okay, well that makes a lot of sense. But if you think about it, it does. The reason I say the first automatic response is to not respond automatically. And the best way to stop that is to just stop. Just resist that urge to respond or react. Because when that happens, when you think of react, that's exactly what we're doing. We're recreating an action from the past. And it's been our experience, it's really going to be hard to change the future if you keep recreating what you recreated in the past to create your current experience, right? So the first thing to do when that accuser comes in is to do nothing. Now the other thing too, and this kind of follows up into the next step, is to not try and argue with it. Because if you argue with that voice, it wins. Because what you're doing is you're giving your attention to that voice. And when you get in an argument with it, you're giving it your attention, you give it an energy, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So the first thing to do, nothing. The second thing, don't argue with it. And the third thing, and probably the most important action step in this, is to know that it's not true. Whatever it's saying, don't believe it. Whatever it's saying, don't believe it. It's not that you can make it go away, because if you try and make it go away, you're giving it energy. Just like turn away from it. Say, you know what? I don't care what you say. And maybe it was true in the past. I don't know. But it doesn't have to be true now. Don't believe the voice of the accuser. And as you start to not give it your energy, you will find that it will start to get less and less and get weaker and weaker. Second voice. We call this the voice of the wounded. So the way this voice starts, and this is where our components will kick in as well, it is, I'm going to say almost always, I think it's probably always, but we'll say almost always triggered by an external trigger. So our 3 components, the physical, our emotions, our thoughts. So it's triggered by an external trigger which causes an immediate thought, voice, and emotion. And the voice usually takes the form of a memory. So external trigger, the voice, the thought, and then an immediate emotion. And they usually come at the exact, they don't, but they feel like they come at the exact same time. Now what that is that is a wound, and we'll go into sort of working with that in the upcoming series of different workshops. But I think the important thing for now is to remember what's happening is that's a wound, which is a memory, which is coming to your awareness, to the surface, to be healed. The first action step is to do nothing. That's for the same reasons as the accuser, right? We don't want to react. We want to choose a different action. And for now, just practice identifying that identifying that as a wound. And so how would you treat a wound? Well, you wouldn't be abrasive with it. You wouldn't, try and kick it out of the park, kind of thing, because you would work at healing that wound. So when that happens, recognize it as simply a wound that is coming to the surface to be healed. And as I said, we'll talk more about action steps with working with those in subsequent workshops. The third voice is the voice of the warrior. And this one probably is the most insidious and can cause, I'm going to say, the most damage. I'll use that word. Mostly because you don't recognize it's there until it's got a really strong foothold. The voice of the warrior doesn't come in from the accuser, or like the accuser. Matter of fact, it's like the exact opposite. As I said, it's like this murmuring in the background, and it just kind of flows below the radar of your awareness, and it just kind of murmurs and murmurs and murmurs. Think of it as like an infection, right? And it starts and it just grows and grows and grows, and we're not aware of it. And it grows and it gains momentum and it grows and it grows, and then finally once it breaks through that level of our awareness, it's got this huge foothold. This is one of the really valuable aspects of really paying attention to what we're thinking, because we can identify those warriors sooner, which makes it a lot easier to mentor them through to releasing. And mentoring is a very good word in this case. An easy way, one of the easy ways to identify a warrior, is the voice will usually start with what if, right? What if this happens? What if this doesn't happen? What if the deal goes through? What if the deal doesn't go through? What if they say yes? What if they don't say yes? What if it works out? What if it doesn't work out? And we're, I think, all very familiar with those. The other thing that's interesting to note about a warrior is many times, if you can look at it in the light of day, it makes no logical sense. If you sit back and listen to the warrior, and that's why so much of the action step in this is identifying, because if you sit back and look at what this voice is, kind of the what if, statement, you'll go, okay, well now that's just stupid, right? I mean, that has no logical bearing, logical reference. It's got like nothing. But the thing of it is, if we don't acknowledge it and work with it, it will affect us. And as I said, this is often one of the most, I'll use the word, damaging ones, because we don't know it's there. So when you recognize this voice, think of it in many ways as a scared child. As a scared child in that they're entering into a new experience or a new adventure or something like that, and they're very trepidatious about it. So again, how would you react to a scared child? Well, you wouldn't necessarily say, okay, that's just stupid, right? Or you wouldn't, necessarily get after them, or you wouldn't, like the accuser, you wouldn't say, get out of here, something like that. What would you do? You would reassure them, right? You would use evidence to help them understand that what they're worrying about, I was going to say, isn't logical, or the chances of it occurring are in so many cases so minute. And so this is, I think, where the keyword mentoring really comes in a lot. So help them to understand these voices. Think of it as a scared little child. Help them to understand that it will be okay. Use evidence from the past where they thought maybe it wasn't going to work out and it did, and they were okay. At the same time, be firm in your direction. So whatever direction you're going that they're worried about, say, I understand your concerns, that type of thing. At the same time, we're still going here. This is the direction we're going. Understand that. The biggest factor in working with those warriors is identifying them early. And I find as you start to do that, then the rest will tend to take care of itself. As you look at them in sort of a cool, clear light of day, you'll go, okay, well that just makes no sense whatsoever. And then they'll tend to release quite quickly. The fourth voice. The fourth voice we call the voice of the inspired. And if I bring my triangle back just for a quick minute here, and as I say, I'll hold it right at the bottom where we've got that I. That's the voice of us. That's the voice of our higher self, universe, whatever label you wish to use. And the way to characterize that voice is it's still, it's calm, it's peaceful, it doesn't shout, it doesn't interrupt, it doesn't do any of the things that the other three do. And it's always there. That's the cool thing about it. It always is residing right at the bottom of that triangle, and it's always there. It never goes away. It never stops comforting or advising, edifying, right? That voice never goes away, but it's just we can't hear it because piled on top of it is all these other voices that drown it out, and it won't shout. It waits for us to come find it. That's the voice of the inspired. And as you learn to nurture that voice, which is one of the huge steps, or places that meditation takes us, the action plan when you hear that voice is to act. Listen. That is the voice of truth. The voice of the accuser, a lie. The voice of the inspired, truth. As you nurture that experience, that relationship, as you learn to identify that voice, as you trust in that voice, when you hear that voice, act, because that is the voice of truth. Excellent. That was the teaching topic for our second workshop, the four voices, the accuser, the wounded, the warrior, and the inspired. Excellent. So I look forward to seeing you, hopefully at our third workshop in this series. As I said, my name is Russ Latow. I'm the founder of the Healing Center. This has been review of lesson 2 of our Ultimate How to Meditate workshop. Our website, www.healingcenter.ca, center spelled CENTER.ca, and we'll see you at the recap of our third one. Cool.